The first time I met Elias Vance, he spilled an entire cup of iced coffee down the front of my shirt. It was a Tuesday in early September, the kind of morning where the air still holds the last gasp of summer. Warm and golden, too stubborn to admit autumn was coming. I had just walked into Meridian Books, the small independent bookstore where I worked 3 days a week. Carrying my own cup of coffee and a stack of new arrivals I needed to shelve, he came around the corner of the literary fiction aisle without looking, his phone pressed to his ear, his elbow connecting perfectly with my cup. The cold, caramel-colored liquid cascaded down my chest. There was a beat of stunned silence.
Ow.
God. He yanked the phone from his ear and stared at me with eyes the color of dark amber brown at first glance, but shot through with something warmer when the light hit them just right. I'm so sorry. I was on a call and it's fine, I said, mostly because I didn't know what else to say. I was standing in the middle of the bookstore I worked at, my white shirt now thoroughly ruined, holding an empty cup and a copy of Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, of all things. He noticed the book. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition, or maybe amusement. Good book, he said. Work, it is. I agreed. His name was Elias. I found that out when he insisted on paying for my dry cleaning and wrote his number on the back of a bookmark he grabbed from the counter. He handed it to me with the practiced ease of someone who is accustomed to things working out in his favor. He was tall, a few inches taller than me, with dark brown hair that fell across his forehead in a way that looked accidental, but probably wasn't. He wore a charcoal blazer over a simple black shirt. He looked like someone who had figured out who he was. I was 26. My name is Noah Calloway. At that point in my life, I was still figuring out the most basic things about myself, what I wanted from a career, what I was willing to settle for in life, and what kind of love I was brave enough to ask for. Elias Vance walked back into Meridian Books 4 more times that month. The first time, he bought the Baldwin novel. The second time, he brought me a replacement iced coffee, caramel oat milk latte. Somehow guessing correctly and lingered long enough that my coworker Priya raised an eyebrow at me from behind the register. The third time, he asked me what I was reading. The fourth time, he asked if I wanted to get dinner. I said yes. Of course, I said yes. Dinner turned into 3 hours at a small Italian place, 2 blocks from the bookstore. We talked about books. He had studied comparative literature before pivoting to urban planning, a combination that fascinated me, and about cities, and about the particular loneliness of being someone who lived mostly inside their own head. I think I build things to feel less alone, he said at one point, turning his wine glass slowly in his fingers. Like, if I plan a public space correctly, if I make it human enough, people will actually use it. And then the city feels less like a machine. I had never heard anyone describe their job that way before. It cracked something open in my chest. We went on 6 more dates over the next 2 months. Museums, long walks along the waterfront, a film festival where we sat close enough in the dark that I was constantly electrically aware of his shoulder against mine. He was careful, not cold, but measured, like he was building something deliberately, checking each piece before he placed it. I was falling for him in the reckless, free-fall way that I had always been warned about. Every conversation felt like a discovery. Every time he laughed, really laughed, the kind that reached his eyes, I felt like I had done something important. The first time he kissed me. We were standing outside my apartment building after a rainy evening at the cinema. He had been quiet on the walk home, thoughtful, the way he got sometimes when something was working itself out behind his eyes. Then he turned, took my face in both his hands, and kissed me with a gentleness that undid me completely. I've been wanting to do that for a while, he said quietly. I know, I said, which was either charming or embarrassing. And I didn't care which taught for the next 6 weeks. We were, for all practical purposes, together. He had a key to my apartment practically. He'd never asked for one. But he knew the code for the building door, and I had stopped locking my apartment when I knew he was coming. He had a side of the bathroom counter. He had a favorite mug. He knew which shelf held the tea and which drawer held the takeout menus. Even though we always ordered the same things, I thought we were building something. Didn't know he was building an exit. It was a Wednesday evening in late November. the kind of cold that makes the city feel brittle and too quiet. He had come over after work, later than usual, and he was strange from the moment he walked in, to still. His shoulders carrying something invisible and heavy. I made tea because I didn't know what else to do with the tension in the room. We sat at my small kitchen table. He wrapped his hands around the mug and looked at the steam rising from it for a long time. "Noah," he said. "Just my name. Nothing else for a moment." "Yeah." I waited. I think he stopped, pressed his lips together. "Try it again. I think what we've been doing has been a mistake." The word mistake landed somewhere in the middle of my rib cage and stayed there. "Mistake," I repeated. Not a question. I was buying time trying to understand if the word meant what it sounded like. "I got an offer," he said. "A position in Copenhagen. Urban development project, international scope. It's the kind of thing I've been working toward for years." He finally looked up. His eyes were tired in a way I hadn't seen before. "I'm going to take it," Kay said slowly. "When do you leave?" 6 weeks. I sat with that. I could feel the logic he had built around this decision. The architecture of it, the career milestone, the timing, the geography. I understood each piece individually. What I didn't understand was the word mistake. He said what we've been doing was a mistake, I said carefully. "Is the mistake that you're leaving, or is the mistake that we started?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in those amber eyes, something that looked uncomfortably like pain. But then he looked away. "I shouldn't have let it get this far," he said quietly. "I knew about Copenhagen. I've known for a while. I should have—" He shook his head. "I'm sorry, Noah. I'm genuinely sorry." He left an hour later. He took his key code knowledge and his mug preference and his carefully measured tenderness, and he walked out of my apartment building into the November cold. And I sat at my kitchen table until the tea went cold and the city outside my window went dark. I did not call him. I did not text him. I had too much pride for that, and not quite enough of it. To stop myself from checking my phone every hour for the first week, he did not reach out. 6 weeks later, presumably, he left for Copenhagen. I stopped presuming things after that, getting over. Elias Vance was slow and unglamorous work. Priya, who had watched the whole arc of it from behind the bookstore register, was patient with me in the way that only truly good friends are. She didn't tell me to move on, and she didn't let me wallow forever either. She brought food. She asked good questions. She let me talk about him, and then, gradually, helped me talk about other things. I threw myself into work. I started writing again. I had a half-finished novel sitting in a drawer that I had been avoiding for 2 years, and found that grief, as terrible as it is, has a strange clarifying quality. Things that had felt impossible to write about suddenly felt necessary. I went on 2 dates over the following 4 months. Both were perfectly nice people, whom I felt absolutely nothing for, which I recognized as my own problem and tried not to inflict upon them. I rearranged my apartment. I got rid of the mug. Slowly, steadily, I rebuilt the version of myself that existed before those 8 weeks with Elias. Not exactly the same. Grief always leaves its watermarks, but functional, present, capable of laughing at things without it feeling like a performance. By February, I thought I was fine. In March, I was fairly certain I was fine. In April, I was confidently fine. And then it was the first week of May. Just past midnight on a Thursday that had technically become a Friday, and I was sitting up late editing a chapter that wasn't cooperating when my phone buzzed. "Hey, are you awake?" An unknown number. But I knew the cadence of those 4 words immediately, the way you know a voice you haven't heard in months, but that your body has never quite forgotten. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed, "Who is this?" Even though I already knew it's Elias, I didn't respond to the text. I set my phone face down on my desk and went back to my chapter. I wrote approximately 4 words and then stared at the wall. I picked up my phone and read his message again. I set it back down. I got up, made myself a glass of water, drank half of it, and stood in my kitchen at 12:47 in the morning trying to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. The kind who responded, the kind who didn't. I had been okay. That was the thing that kept circling in my mind. I had done the work. I had rebuilt. I had reached the specific, quiet peace that comes after something painful when you finally stop waiting for it to be unpainful. And just accept it as a fact of your history. He did not have the right to come and disturb that peace with a text message from a new number at midnight. I decided I would not respond. I went back to my desk. I wrote 0 more words. I checked my phone twice. I told myself firmly that I was going to sleep, and then at 2:13 in the morning, someone knocked on my door. I should clarify that I live in a building with a secure entry code, which Elias had known, and which I had changed after he left, or thought I had. Later I would discover that I had changed it once, forgotten, reset it to the old one, and never corrected this. A metaphor, perhaps, that I am choosing not to examine too deeply. I stood in my hallway, in my socks, and a worn-out university sweatshirt, staring at my front door, 3 soft knocks, deliberate, not frantic, not aggressive, just, I'm here. I know it's late. I'm asking. I opened the door. Elias's Vance looked like he had been traveling for a very long time. He had a bag slung over one shoulder. His hair was shorter than I remembered. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was wearing the same charcoal blazer, or one exactly like it, and he looked at me the way people look at things they are afraid to lose. "Hi," he said. "It's 2 in the morning." I said, "I know." He didn't move. He was waiting not for permission to come in, I realized, but for me to tell him to leave. He had come here willing to be turned away. That was the first thing that cracked my armor, though I didn't let it show. "You move back," I said. Not a question. It was obvious from the bag, from his presence in this city, from the fact that he was standing at my door. I moved back, he confirmed. When? Today? This morning? Technically? Yesterday morning? He ran a hand through his hair. I couldn't sleep. "I drove past here and I saw your light on, and He stopped. "I know this isn't fair. I know I don't have the right. You really don't," I said. "I know." We looked at each other. The hallway was quiet. From somewhere in the building, someone had a TV on, a low murmur of sound. "What do you want, Elias?" He looked at me with those amber eyes, and this time there was nothing measured about them. Whatever careful architecture he usually built around himself had come down. He looked exhausted and uncertain and entirely himself. "I want to explain," he said. "I want to tell you the truth, which I didn't do 6 months ago. I was a coward, and I handled things badly, and you deserved better than what I gave you." He paused. "And then I'll leave if you want me to. But I needed to say it in person. I owed you that much. I let him in because I am, at my core, someone who believes in hearing people out. Also because my living room lamp was on, and the couch was right there, and I didn't feel like standing in the doorway all night." He sat on the couch. I sat across from him in the armchair. A deliberate choice, distance I could control. He noticed it and didn't comment. "I did know about Copenhagen," he started. "I knew before I asked you to dinner the first time. I told myself it wasn't serious, that it would stay casual, that we were both adults and it would be fine." "Oh," he looked down at his hands. "I was wrong about most of that." "Most," I said. "We were adults," he allowed, and something in his voice was almost wry, almost like the Elias I had known, the one who could make me smile at things that weren't quite jokes. The rest of it, the casual part, the it would be fine part, I was wrong. He told me that he had known well before that November evening that what was happening between us had become something real. And that, instead of telling me that, instead of having the honest conversation about Copenhagen and what it meant and whether we could figure something out together, he had panicked. He had decided, alone and without consulting me, that it was better to end things cleanly than to ask me to wait for something that might not work. "I made a decision for both of us," he said, "and I called it a mistake what we had, because it was easier than saying I was scared. Scared of asking you for something big and having you say no? Scared of wanting something that badly? He met my eyes. I called it a mistake because I was the mistake, and I didn't know how to say that without falling apart. The apartment was very quiet. Copenhagen, I said finally. How was it? He blinked, clearly not expecting the question to go in that direction. Good, professionally. The project was everything I'd worked for. Significant, meaningful, the right kind of hard. He paused. Personally, I was lonely in a way I hadn't anticipated. And I kept thinking about you. You didn't reach out for 6 months. I know, not once. Elias, I know. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. I thought if I contacted you, I'd be doing it for myself, not for you. I had hurt you, and I didn't have the right to reach out just because I was miserable. He exhaled slowly. And then the project ended, and I had a choice. Stay and find another project. Or come home, and I realized I had been making decisions based on fear for most of the past year, and I was tired of it. So you came home? So I came home. He looked at me directly. I came home, and I drove past here at 2 in the morning because I saw your light on, and I needed you to know the truth. Not because I expect anything. I don't expect you to. I'm not here to ask you to just pick up where He stopped. And for a moment his composure cracked just slightly, something raw and honest at the edges. I just needed you to know that it wasn't a mistake. What I said that night was wrong. What we had was the most real thing I've had in years. And I called it a mistake because I was afraid to call it what it actually was. What was it? I asked quietly. He looked at me for a long moment. The beginning of something I didn't know how to be brave enough for, he said. Then, the word then hung in the air between us. Small and significant. I sat with everything he had said. It would have been easy. It would have been so easy to let the warmth of his honesty, the sincerity in his eyes, the 6 months of missing him that I had finally stopped admitting to myself, simply collapse the distance between us. To stand up from the armchair and close the 6 feet between us and say, okay, let's try again. There was a part of me that wanted exactly that, but I had rebuilt myself. That mattered. Can I tell you something? I said, please, he said. When you left, I was devastated. I said it plainly, without drama, the way you can say things at 2 in the morning that would feel too exposed in daylight. Not just sad, genuinely devastated. Because it wasn't just losing you. It was realizing that I had let myself want something that much. That wanting it that much had made me stop paying attention to the fact that I didn't actually know what you wanted. He nodded slowly. He wasn't trying to interrupt or defend himself or rush me toward forgiveness. He was listening. I had to do a lot of work, I continued. To get back to a version of myself that wasn't defined by waiting for something or grieving something, and I did that work. And I'm genuinely okay now. I paused. I need you to know that I'm not sitting here in a pool of heartbreak that you can just walk back into and fix. That's not what this is. I know, he said, and I believed him. But I'm also not someone who gets the chance to hear what you just told me and pretends I didn't hear it. I looked at him steadily. You were scared? You handled it badly. You're here now telling me the truth, which is what you should have done then. I exhaled. I believe you. And I don't want to pretend that what we had wasn't what it was, just because it ended badly. The silence between us was different now. Softer, somehow. So what does that mean? He asked carefully. It means I'm not ready to just start over like nothing happened, I said. But I'm also not going to tell you to leave and never contact me again. I looked at him, this man who had knocked on my door at 2 in the morning because he had been driving past and seen my light on. It means I think you should get some sleep, because you look like you've been awake for about 30 hours. And then I think you should text me. Not at 2 in the morning. At a normal hour, and we can have coffee. And talk. Like people who are figuring something out slowly and honestly. He looked at me for a long moment, and the expression on his face was something I didn't have a word for at the time. Later I would describe it as relief that didn't feel like winning. Like he understood that this was not the ending of something hard, but the beginning of something careful. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, I said. He stood up. He picked up his bag. At the door, he paused and turned back. And there was something in his eyes, not a question, exactly. More like a truth being held out. For what it's worth, he said, I never stopped thinking that your first instinct about Giovanni's room was exactly right. On our first real date, that the entire book is about the terror of loving something you're too afraid to claim. We had talked about it for 40 minutes. Good night, Elias, I said. But I was almost smiling. Good night, Noah. He texted at 9:15 on a Friday morning. A reasonable hour. Good morning. Coffee this weekend? I said yes. We met at a small place near the waterfront, not one of our old spots, which I think was deliberate on both our parts, a neutral ground. He looked better for the sleep. He brought a book to show me, a new release by an urban planning theorist, which made me laugh because it was such a particular, Elias thing to do. We talked for 2.5 hours. Not about us? Exactly. Not yet. About Copenhagen? About my novel? About Priya's recent promotion? About the urban development project he was now consulting on locally? We talked the way we used to talk, with that ease that I had always quietly marveled at. The kind that makes 2 hours feel like 20 minutes,